The night was heavy with silence, yet the village square was loud with whispers. Lyra stood in the center, her head lowered, her silver hair covering most of her face around her. The alien villagers muttered cruel words, their voices sharp, like knives. She is broken. One woman hissed, she cannot give life. She cannot breed. What use is she? An elder sneered. Lyra kept her hands pressed tightly together, as if holding her chest would stop her heart from breaking. She wanted to shout back, to say she was more than her body. But her voice stayed trapped in her throat. The elders stepped forward, their robes dragging across the ground. One lifted his long staff, pointing it at her like a judge giving a sentence. "This one is a failure," he declared, his voice echoing. "She has no worth, no future, and no right to remain among us." The crowd nodded, feeding on cruelty as if it were food. Mothers pulled their children closer, whispering warnings not to be like her. Young men laughed, some throwing stones near her feet. She flinched but did not cry, though her eyes burned with unshed tears. Farther back, a human trader named Daniel watched quietly. He had come to this alien village to barter supplies. Nothing more, but his sharp eyes caught the strange scene. He saw the young alien woman standing alone, trembling under the weight of hate. Daniel frowned, confused and unsettled in his world. Worth was not decided this way. He wondered what kind of people could turn against one of their own so completely. Lyra lifted her chin just slightly. Her voice finally cracked the silence. Soft and breaking. "Please, I am still me. I can work. I can help. I am not nothing." But the elder's staff slammed against the ground, drowning her words. "You are less than nothing," he thundered. "You are a reminder of weakness, a stain upon our kind. We will not carry such shame." His decree was final, cruel and cold. The crowd cheered it, eager to see her destroyed. Her knees weakened, her chest tight, the world around her blurred as shame washed over her. Daniel's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists at his side. He did not know her name, yet anger burned inside him. He had seen many things in his travels: harsh wars, empty stomachs, lonely wanderers. But there was something different here. This was not just hunger or pain. This was cruelty made into law, and it struck him harder than he expected as the night deepened. The villagers dragged Lyra out of the square. They threw her belongings into the dirt: a small cloth bag, a broken necklace, a thin blanket. She clutched the blanket tightly, her only shield against the cold. The elders shouted for her to leave by sunrise. If she stayed, she would be hunted down and cast to the beasts beyond the border. The people laughed again, as though her suffering were a game, and then they turned their backs, leaving her standing in the shadows. Alone, Daniel did not move, not yet. He watched her gather her small things with shaking hands. Her lips moved, whispering to herself words no one else could hear. Perhaps prayers, perhaps curses, perhaps both. For a moment, he almost stepped forward. But something inside him told him to wait. This was her battle now, but maybe it would soon become his. That night, in the tiny inn of the village, Daniel could not sleep. The laughter of the villagers still echoed in his mind. The sight of the woman's lowered head and trembling shoulders burned inside him. He tried to push it away, telling himself it was not his problem. He was just a traveler, a human in an alien world. He had no place in their laws, and yet he could not forget her eyes. Eyes that held pain but also a flicker of fire. Eyes that had looked up for just 1 second, as if begging someone, anyone, to see her. Outside, the wind howled across the desert. Carrying dust and sorrow, Lyra sat alone near the border of the village. Clutching her blanket, her body shivered. Not only from the cold, but from the emptiness inside her. She thought of all the years she tried to prove herself, all the prayers, the rituals, the medicines, the endless whispers. Every failure had been thrown back in her face until she began to believe them. And yet, as she sat on the edge of exile, something inside her whispered different words. "I am more than this," she breathed. Though her voice shook, "I will not let them end me here." Back at the inn, Daniel stood, restless. His decision came quietly but firmly. If she left this village, she would not walk alone. He would follow. Not because it was wise, not because it was easy, but because something in her silence called to him, and he could not ignore it. The night was not over, and her journey had only just begun, but already fate had tied their paths together. Neither of them knew it yet, but the moment she was branded a failure, she also became something else, the future waiting for a human heart to claim. The morning sun rose slowly, spilling pale light across the alien village. By the gates, Lyra stood with her thin blanket and her small cloth bag. The villagers gathered once again, eager to watch her final shame. Their faces were cold. Some sneering, some laughing, none showing mercy. The elder raised his staff and pointed toward the barren land beyond the gates. "You walk into the dust, never return," he declared, his voice hard as stone. Lyra bowed her head, her silver hair catching the sunlight. She did not speak, for her voice would not be heard here. Instead, she tightened her grip on her belongings and stepped forward. Every footfall felt like a stone dropped into her chest. Her heart pounded, but her eyes remained dry. She would not let them see her break. Not now. Daniel watched from a distance, standing half-hidden near the market stalls. He had not left the village during the night. He told himself to mind his own business, yet his eyes never left her. Something about the way she walked, slow, heavy, yet determined, stirred him. Her people called her a failure, but Daniel saw something else, a strength born from surviving pain. He had seen that same look in human refugees after wars. The look of someone who carried wounds, but still walked forward. As she passed through the gates, the laughter of the villagers faded behind her. The desert stretched out before her, endless, empty, and cruel. Her shadow stretched long across the sand, and Daniel knew she was walking into death. Unless someone acted, hours passed, and the heat of the day pressed down like a weight. Lyra walked until her legs shook, the dust clinging to her bare feet. Her throat burned from thirst, her lips cracked. The blanket she carried dragged behind her, gathering dirt. She stumbled once, falling to her knees. The sand was hot, the sky unforgiving. For a moment, she thought of simply lying there and letting it end. But deep inside, a spark of defiance pushed her up again. She whispered to herself, "I will not die for their laughter." And she kept walking, step by painful step, unseen behind her. Daniel followed at a distance. He kept his pace steady, his eyes sharp, his weapon slung across his back. He could have approached her earlier, but he wanted to see what she would do if she still had the will to survive. Now, after hours of watching her push forward despite her weakness, he knew she was no ordinary woman. She had been cast away, yes, but she had not let herself fall into despair. That strength pulled him closer, but so did the danger he saw gathering in the distance. Dark shapes began to circle in the far-off dunes, scavenger beasts, long-legged and hungry. Drawn by the smell of weakness, their cries echoed, sharp and terrible. Lyra froze as she saw them approach. Her heart raced, her hands shook. She reached into her bag, but found nothing useful, only her broken necklace and scraps of cloth. The beasts moved closer, their glowing eyes fixed on her. Her breath quickened. She backed away, stumbling on the uneven sand. Her body screamed for her to run, but her legs refused. For the first time, she thought she might truly die here. And her people would laugh even louder when they heard. Daniel moved swiftly now, no longer willing to wait. He drew his weapon, a human plasma rifle, and aimed at the beasts. The crack of the first shot split the air. One beast fell, the others hissed and scattered. Circling with caution, Daniel shouted, his voice carrying across the desert, "Get behind me." Lyra blinked, stunned, her mind slow to understand. The human she had seen in the village was here, standing between her and death. She hesitated. But his command carried weight. She stumbled forward, clutching her blanket as if it could shield her. The beasts lunged again, but Daniel fired with precision. Another fell, the rest fled. Their cries fading into the horizon when silence returned. The only sound was Lyra's ragged breathing. She stood behind him, her body trembling. Her wide eyes were fixed on him. No one had ever stood for her. Not once, not ever. And now this. Human, this stranger had risked himself to save her. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Finally, she managed. "Why? Why would you help me?" Daniel lowered his rifle, his eyes meeting hers. "Because no one deserves to die like that," he said simply. His words struck her harder than the sun. They were not pity, not cruelty, not mockery. They were truth, plain and unshaken. For a moment she could only stare. Her chest rose and fell, her heart racing in confusion. This human had no reason to care, no reason to protect her. And yet he had. The thought frightened her, but it also lit something inside her she thought was gone. Hope. Daniel turned and began walking. "If you want to live, come with me," he said, without looking back. Lyra clutched her blanket tighter, staring at his back as he moved across the sand. She hesitated, the weight of her shame pulling at her, but slowly, carefully, she followed, her steps shaky at first. Then, steadier, for the first time in her life. She was not walking alone into the dust. The desert night fell quickly, the blazing sun sinking into shadows. The air turned cold, the kind of cold that crept under skin and settled deep in bones. Lyra shivered, clutching her blanket around her thin frame. Her legs ached from walking, and every step felt heavier than the last. Beside her, Daniel walked in silence, his rifle hanging at his side. He did not speak much. But his steady presence was like a wall between her and fear. Every sound in the dark made her heart jump, yet each time she looked at him, she found herself breathing easier. At last, Daniel stopped near a rocky outcrop hidden between the stones. It was a small shelter he had used before, a simple camp with a fire pit, a worn canvas, and supplies stored in a metal crate. It was no palace, but to Lyra, who had been thrown into the dust with nothing, it looked like safety. "Sit," Daniel said, pointing to a flat stone by the fire pit. Lyra hesitated, unused to being given space instead of commands. Slowly, she lowered herself onto the stone, her body trembling from exhaustion. Daniel struck a spark, and soon the fire glowed, chasing away the cold. Lyra stretched her hands toward it, her fingers shaking. Warmth touched her skin, and tears pricked her eyes before she could stop them. She turned her face away, not wanting him to see, but Daniel noticed anyway, his sharp eyes catching everything. He reached into his crate and pulled out a small container. Opening it, he offered her dried rations and a flask of water. "Eat," he said simply. Her hands shook as she accepted the food. She bit into it, and though it was rough and tasteless, she chewed hungrily. Her throat burned with thirst as she drank the water. Never in her life had such simple things felt like treasures. For a moment, she forgot the cruelty of her people. For a moment, she felt like a living being again, not a burden or failure. Daniel sat across from her, his face lit by firelight. He watched her carefully, not with pity, but with quiet curiosity. "Why did they cast you out?" he finally asked, his voice low. Lyra froze, the food heavy in her mouth, her eyes lowered, shame pressing hard on her shoulders. "They called me broken," she whispered. "I cannot give children, and to them, A woman who cannot breed is worthless." The words cut her as she spoke them. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "They laughed, they mocked me, they called me a curse, so they cast me into the dust to die." Her hands clenched around the flask, her body trembling. With anger and sorrow, Daniel leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he listened. He had known cruel people before. But this was different. This was not war. Not hunger, not survival. This was hatred born from cold hearts. "They are wrong," he said firmly. His tone carried no doubt, no hesitation. Lyra looked up, her wide eyes searching his face. No one had ever spoken those words to her. Not once in her entire life. Her lips parted, but no words came, for the first time. Someone looked at her and did not see a failure. He saw her. The fire crackled between them, the silence heavy yet strangely comforting. Daniel's gaze softened slightly. "In my world, people are not measured by that," he said. "Worth is not in breeding, not in what others demand. It is in who you are, in what you do, in how you stand." His words were simple, but to Lyra, they were like water on dry soil. Her heart ached with something she had long buried: hope. Her hands loosened around the flask, her shoulders trembling. She wanted to believe him. Yet fear whispered inside her. What if he was wrong? What if she really was nothing? Her silence stretched, but Daniel did not press her. He only added another piece of wood to the fire and leaned back, as if saying, without words, that he was not leaving for the first time in many nights. Lyra's eyelids grew heavy, not with dread but with weariness, the warmth of the fire, the food in her stomach, and the quiet presence of someone who did not spit on her name. Offit pressed her into peace. She pulled the blanket tighter, and curled against the stone. Her body trembled less now, her breath slowing. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered softly, "Thank you." Her voice was almost lost in the crackle of the fire. But Daniel heard it, his lips curving into the smallest of smiles. He said nothing, but his eyes softened. Outside, the desert winds howled, carrying whispers of hunters and shadows. Unseen eyes watched from the distance, waiting for their moment. But for this night, in this small circle of firelight, Lyra was safe. For the first time since her exile, she did not feel alone. And as the firelight danced across her face, Daniel saw something new. Not a failure, not a curse, but a soul who deserved to live. And though he did not speak it aloud, a thought settled deep inside him. He would not let her be cast into the dust again. Not while he still breathed. The night stretched long, the fire still glowing in the small shelter. Daniel sat awake, keeping watch with his rifle across his knees. Beside the fire, Lyra slept curled in her blanket, her breaths soft and uneven. She looked fragile, almost too fragile to belong to a world as cruel as this. But Daniel knew looks could lie. He had seen her walk through the dust, stumble and rise again. There was strength inside her, even if she did not believe it yet. The desert wind shifted, carrying with it a faint sound, a crunch of sand, a whisper of movement too heavy to be the wind. Daniel's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on the rifle. He rose silently, stepping out from the circle of firelight. The shadows beyond the rocks seemed thicker than before. And then he saw them, figures moving low, their shapes familiar Leon hunters. Their armor glinted faintly in the moonlight, their weapons strapped across their shoulders. His jaw tightened. He had been expecting this. Her people would not be satisfied with exile. They wanted her erased completely. Inside the shelter, Lyra stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, still heavy with exhaustion. She blinked at the fire, then at the absence of Daniel. Fear pricked her heart until she saw his silhouette at the edge of the rocks. She rose quietly, clutching her blanket, moving closer. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel turned, his expression sharp. His finger pressed to his lips. Her breath caught as she followed his gaze. She saw them too, the hunters. Sliding closer like wolves, her body trembled, the cruel. Memories of her village crashing back. They had sent these men for her to finish what the exile began. The hunters stepped into the dim glow of the fire. One of them sneered, his voice mocking. So, a failure hides with a human. Another spat on the sand. Better to put both of them in the ground. Daniel stepped forward, his rifle raised. His stance firm. Turn back, he said flatly, his tone cold as steel. The hunters laughed. Their voices cruel and sharp. Do you think you can protect her? She is nothing. She is dust. Their words cut into Lyra like blades. Her knees weakened. But Daniel's voice rose stronger. She is not nothing, he said, his voice echoing against the rocks. She is under my protection, and if you want her, you'll have to go through me. The hunters paused, surprised by the fire in his words. Then their leaders sneered again. Then we go through you. In a flash, weapons were drawn. The sound of steel against the silence. Daniel fired first. The blast of plasma lighting the night, one hunter fell, his body crashing into the sand. The others lunged forward, their movements quick and deadly. Lyra gasped, pressing herself against the rocks, fear tightening her chest. Her body screamed to hide, to vanish. But another voice whispered inside her. If she stayed frozen, Daniel would fight alone, and he might fall. Her trembling hands reached down, fingers closing around a heavy rock. Her heart pounded. Fear, battling courage, but she forced herself to move. Daniel fought fiercely, his rifle spitting fire. He dodged a strike, slammed his shoulder into one attacker, and fired again. The heat of battle burned in his veins, but he was outnumbered. A hunter swung a blade. Slicing across Daniel's arm, he hissed in pain, nearly dropping his weapon. The hunter raised his blade again, ready to strike, but before it could fall, the heavy rock smashed into his helmet. The man staggered, stumbling back. Lyra stood behind him, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with shock at her own action. Daniel seized the moment, firing and ending the fight with a burst of plasma. For a heartbeat, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of the fire. 3 hunters lay in the dust, the others retreating into the shadows. Their leader shouted promises of return. There, voices fading into the desert wind, Daniel lowered his rifle, his arm bleeding, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He turned, his eyes meeting Lyra's. She was shaking, the rock slipping from her hands. Tears streamed down her face, though she tried to hide them. I helped, she whispered, as if unsure it mattered. Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm but softer now. You saved me, he said. Don't forget that. Her lips trembled, her eyes dropping to the ground. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever said she was worth anything, and yet this human said it as if it were the most obvious truth for the first time. She felt something warm inside her chest, not just safety, but belonging. The hunters would return. She knew it. The danger was not over. But something had changed in her heart. For the first time, she believed she might not face it alone. As Daniel bandaged his wound, Lyra sat beside him. The firelight flickered across their faces. She watched him carefully, her eyes tracing the lines of strength and exhaustion. And in that quiet moment, she whispered to herself words her people had tried to take away. I am not nothing. Daniel glanced at her, and though he said nothing, his small smile told her he had heard. The night was far from safe. The hunters would come again, stronger, but for now, within the small circle of fire and trust. Lyra was no longer the branded failure. She was someone worth fighting for. The fire had burned low. only faint embers glowing against the dark. Daniel sat with his back against the rocks, his arm bound with rough bandages. Lyra sat close, her knees drawn up, her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Neither spoke for a long time. The weight of the fight still heavy in the air. The desert felt quieter now, but the silence was not peace. It was warning. Both of them knew the hunters would return, and next time they would bring more when the first light of dawn touched the sand. Daniel stood slowly. His body ached, but his eyes were steady. "We cannot stay here," he said, his voice calm, but firm. "They will track us again, and if we wait, we'll be trapped." Lyra's chest tightened at his words. Her heart wanted to rest, but she nodded, because deep inside she knew he was right. She rose on shaky legs, clutching her blanket. Her eyes met his, uncertain, searching. "Where will we go?" she asked softly. "Toward human lands," Daniel answered, adjusting his pack. "It's a long way, but it's safer than staying in theirs." The desert stretched out endless and merciless. Every step pressed against their strength. Every breath carried dust. Lyra walked beside Daniel, her body weary but her spirit unwilling to fall. Each time she stumbled, Daniel slowed his pace. Never leaving her behind, she noticed it, and something unspoken grew in her chest. He did not see her as a burden. He matched his steps with hers. For the first time, someone walked with her, not ahead, not above, but with hours past. The sun burned hot, and the horizon shimmered. Lyra's throat ached, and her body begged her to stop, but she remembered the fire, the hunters, the way Daniel had stood for her. She whispered to herself, "I must keep going." Her voice was small, but it carried strength. Daniel glanced at her, hearing her whisper, though she thought it was private. He did not smile, but his eyes softened, proud without words. At midday, they found shelter beneath a broken cliff. Daniel handed her a water flask. Watching as she drank carefully, he took only a small sip himself before closing it again. Lyra frowned, noticing his restraint. "You need more," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You needed more." Her chest tightened at his answer, warmth filling her heart. Never in her life had anyone placed her need above their own. She lowered her gaze, whispering, "Why are you doing this?" Daniel leaned back against the stone, his voice steady. "Because you deserve more than what they gave you." Her eyes widened, her breath catching. No one had ever told her she deserved anything. For years, all she had heard was that she was worthless. Yet this human, who owed her nothing, spoke like her life had meaning. Her fingers trembled against the flask, her throat thick with emotion. She wanted to believe him, but fear still whispered inside her. "What if you are wrong?" she asked, her voice breaking. Daniel met her gaze, unflinching. "Then I'll still stand with you," he said. Simple words. Yet they struck deeper than any blade. Her heart felt both fragile and strong at once. When the heat of the day eased, they moved again. The land around them shifted from flat sand to jagged stone. The shadows grew long, and the desert wind carried uneasy whispers. Daniel's sharp eyes scanned the horizon. He saw faint tracks, clawed and heavy. Something else stalked this land. Not only hunters, but something far worse. "Stay close," he told her, his tone leaving no room for question. Lyra obeyed, her small steps quickening to match his stride. The air grew heavier, and each shadow felt alive. By nightfall, they reached the ruins of an old station. Metal beams broken, walls collapsed, sand covering half the structure. Daniel led her inside, checking corners with careful eyes. "This will do for the night," he murmured. They set a small fire, its glow pushing back the darkness. Lyra sat near it, staring into the flames, her mind spinning. At last, she spoke, her voice soft and trembling. "All my life, I thought if I could not give children, I was nothing." Daniel looked at her across the fire. Silent, waiting, she swallowed hard. Continuing, they made. Me believe I was only a body, a tool that failed. But you. Her voice faltered, tears slipping down her cheeks. You make me feel like I am still someone. Daniel's eyes softened, his voice calm but certain. You are someone, Lyra, and not because of what they want from you. He leaned forward. Oh. The firelight casting shadows across his face. You are someone because you endured, because you walked through the dust and kept walking, because you stood when they tried to break you. His words sank deep into her, filling cracks that had been empty for so long. Lyra covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. But this time her tears were not only sorrow, they were release. Daniel did not reach to stop her. He only watched quietly, and when her crying eased, he said softly, "They called you a failure. But I see more. I see a fighter, and fighters are not worthless." Lyra lowered her hands, her eyes red but brighter. Her heart trembled with a new kind of strength. For the first time, she wondered if her future was not already decided by others. Perhaps it was hers to claim. The fire flickered, shadows dancing across the broken station. Outside, the desert stirred, the air thick with danger. But inside, within the fragile shelter of light and words, a bond was forming, steady and undeniable. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew the road ahead would be harder still. The hunters were not the only threat. Something darker waited in the storm to come. And it would test not only their strength, but the fragile hope growing between them. The storm rolled in from the horizon like a wall of shadow. Dark clouds twisted above the desert, lightning flashing across the sky. Winds howled through the broken ruins of the old station, shaking metal beams and tearing at loose scraps of cloth inside. Daniel checked his rifle while Lyra hugged her blanket tightly around herself. Her eyes wide, the storm's roar sounded like voices of the dead, whispering and screaming all at once. Every instinct inside her told her to hide, to disappear. But there was nowhere to run. Daniel crouched near her, his calm presence cutting through the chaos outside. "This will pass," he said. His voice steady. She looked at him, fear and doubt trembling in her eyes. "What if it doesn't?" she asked, her words breaking. He held her gaze, the firelight flickering across his scarred face. "Then we endure," he answered simply. Something in the way he said it struck deep inside her. He spoke as if endurance itself was a kind of strength, a kind of victory. Lyra swallowed hard, her body shaking. She whispered, "I don't know how." Daniel placed his rifle aside, his hands rough and scarred, yet gentle as he reached toward her. "You already do," he said. "You walked through exile. You faced beasts. You stood when you were told to fall. That is how you endure." Her throat tightened, tears pressing at her eyes. She shook her head, whispering, "I was afraid. I was weak." Daniel leaned closer, his voice low but fierce. "Being afraid doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're alive and choosing to keep moving. That makes you stronger than all of them." Her tears spilled then, hot and unrelenting. She pressed her hands over her face, her voice breaking. "They told me I was nothing. They told me I was broken, and I believed them." Her words were muffled, but raw, each syllable filled with pain. Daniel sat beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "You are not broken," he said firmly. "You are more than they ever dared to see." The firelight glowed between them, warm and steady. Lyra lowered her hands slowly, her eyes wet and shimmering. She looked at him as if his words were a light in her endless dark. Silence filled the station, heavy yet comforting. The storm outside beat against the walls. But inside, something else was happening. Lyra felt her chest open, a weight she had carried for years slowly lifting. Daniel did not look at her like the others had. He did not see failure, did not see weakness. He saw her just earned it. Terrified her as much as it healed her. Her lips trembled, her voice shaking. Why do you see me this way? Why do you care? Daniel's eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. Because you matter, he said, his words like stone, unbreakable. Her breath caught, her body trembling at the weight of those words. No one had ever spoken them to her. Not once. It was as if her entire life had been waiting for someone to say it. She covered her mouth, tears slipping again. But this time they carried not only sorrow, they carried something else. Hope. The storm raged louder, thunder shaking the ground. But within the firelight, there was a different storm. Lyra's heart ached and burned, not with shame, but with something new. She wanted to believe him, wanted to hold on to his words and never let go. But fear whispered still. What if you're wrong? She asked again, her voice barely a breath. Daniel leaned closer, his hand brushing her trembling fingers. Then I'll still stand with you, he repeated, his tone unwavering. Her chest shook, her lips pressing together as more tears fell. She closed her eyes, letting his words sink into the cracks of her soul. Slowly, she moved closer, until her shoulder touched his. She had never leaned on anyone before, never dared to, but now she did. And he did not move away. The fire popped. The wind howled, but within that moment, she felt something she had never felt before. Belonging. Time passed slowly, the storm refusing to fade. Lyra dozed against him, her breaths uneven but calmer than before. Daniel kept watch, his rifle within reach. But his eyes softened each time they drifted to her face. She was no longer just the outcast of her people. To him, she was someone worth protecting, worth fighting for. And as the fire burned low, his thoughts whispered what his lips did not yet say. She is not failure. She is future. When dawn broke, the storm had passed. The desert lay quiet, but not empty. Shadows shifted at the edge of the ruins. Hunters returning, their footsteps pressing into the sand. Daniel's eyes sharpened as he rose. Rifle in hand, he touched Lyra's shoulder gently, waking her. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with sleep and fear. They found us again, he said, his voice calm. Lyra's chest tightened, but when she looked at him, she saw no fear in his eyes, only resolve. She nodded, wiping her face quickly, her trembling easing. She was not alone this time, and though the hunters came closer, she felt something fierce rise inside her. This time, she would not only survive, she would fight beside the one who gave her belonging. Asterisk. The ruins were still damp from the storm, puddles of rainwater gleaming under the rising sun. Lyra stood close to Daniel, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders like fragile armor. The sound of footsteps echoed outside the broken walls, steady, unhurried, cruel. The hunters had returned, their shadows moving closer with every breath. Lyra's heart raced, her body trembling. But when she looked at Daniel, she found steadiness. His rifle was ready, his eyes sharp, but his voice was calm when he spoke. They will not take you, he said, his words like stone. For the first time, Lyra believed it. The hunters stepped into view, their leader at the front. His armor was darker, his weapon gleaming with alien light. He sneered when he saw Lyra standing behind Daniel. So the broken one still lives, he mocked. And now she hides behind a human coward. His men laughed, their voices like blades in the air. But Daniel's stance did not shift, his rifle steady, his body firm as a wall. She is not broken, he answered, his voice carrying across the ruins. She is mine to protect, and I will not let you touch her. The leader's sneer twisted into a snarl. You would fight us for her, for a useless failure. Daniel's voice cut through the wind. She is worth more than all of you, and she is worth my life if that is the price. Lyra's breath caught, her chest tightening as his words struck deep. Her people had called her nothing, but here this human called her everything. Tears pricked her eyes, but this time they were not only pain. They were fire. The hunters spread out, their weapons rising. The air grew tense. The silence before violence. Daniel's finger rested on the trigger, his eyes never leaving theirs. The leader shouted, and the attack began. Blades clashed against stone, rifles cracked with bursts of light. Daniel fired, his shots precise, dropping one hunter. Then another. But they were many, too many. The ruins shook with the fury of battle, dust rising with every strike. Lyra pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. Every instinct screamed for her to hide, to vanish, to survive by silence. But then she saw Daniel stumble, his arm bleeding again, his rifle knocked aside. A hunter raised his blade. Above him, ready to strike the final blow, something inside her snapped. She screamed, grabbing a broken metal beam from the ground. Her arms shook as she swung with all her strength. The beam struck the hunter's helmet, sending him crashing into the rubble. Daniel rolled free, grabbing his rifle again. He looked at her, shock in his eyes, but also pride. "You're not." "Nothing," he shouted, his voice fierce. "You're with me." Her chest burned at his words, her hands trembling but refusing to let go of the beam. The hunters circled again, snarling, their numbers thinning but not broken. Lyra stepped closer. To Daniel, her shoulders squaring, she was afraid, but for the first time. She chose not to hide. Together, they faced the enemy. Human and outcast, side by side, the leader lunged forward, his blade clashing with Daniel's rifle. Sparks flew, the sound harsh in the ruins. Daniel grunted, his strength meeting the aliens. Fury, but the leader was larger, stronger, pressing him back. Lyra's chest heaved, her heart racing. She looked around desperately, her eyes falling on a loose stone high above, a broken beam balanced on the edge of the wall, unstable. She grabbed the metal beam in her hands and slammed it against the support. With a loud crack, the beam gave way, the heavy stone above crashing down. The leader turned too late. Crushed beneath the falling weight, silence followed, broken only by the scurrying footsteps of the surviving hunters as they fled into the desert. The ruins shook one last time, then stilled. Daniel lowered his rifle, his breaths harsh and heavy. He turned to her, his eyes fierce but shining with something new. "You saved me again," he said, his voice rough but warm. Lyra dropped the metal beam, her knees weak, her body shaking. Her chest burned with fear and triumph all at once. "I was afraid," she whispered, "but I couldn't let them take you." Daniel stepped closer, placing his hand on her trembling shoulder. "You are not a failure," he said, his voice steady. "You are not broken. You are not worthless. And if they cannot see it, that is their blindness, not yours." Her tears fell freely, but this time she did not hide them. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the truth of his words. She was not nothing. She was someone. The sun broke fully over the desert, casting golden light through the ruins. Daniel's hand stayed on her shoulder, firm and grounding. His voice softened, carrying weight like a vow. "They called you a failure, but to me, you are my future." Her breath caught, her heart pounding at his words. No one had ever claimed her. No one had ever wanted her for more than what she could not give. But this human did, and his words wrapped around her. Like armor stronger than any metal, she lifted her head, meeting his gaze with trembling strength. "I will walk with you," she whispered, her voice steady for the first time. Daniel nodded, his lips curving into the smallest, proudest smile. The desert stretched out before them, endless and harsh. But it no longer felt empty. Together, they stepped forward, leaving behind ruins, hunters, and the chains of her past. Every step carried a new truth. She was not the branded failure anymore. She was the chosen future, and she walked into it with him by her side.